I've always preferred hiking alone. It's not that I hate people. I just need the silence. Out in the wilderness, there's no pressure to perform, no deadlines, no digital tether, just trees, wind, dirt, and me. While planning a weekend getaway, I stumbled across a barely mentioned trail called Dead Pine on an obscure hiking forum. The post was from 2015, with low-resolution photos and coordinates that didn't match any official map. No recent reviews. Perfect. The drive took me deep into remote country. Cell service disappeared 2 hours in, and roads narrowed from highway to gravel paths barely wide enough for my Subaru. I stopped at a small gas station where an old man behind the counter watched me with unblinking eyes as I paid for a coffee. "Heading anywhere particular?" he asked, voice like sandpaper. "Dead Pine Trail," I answered. His weathered face went still. "Why?" "Just hiking. I like the quiet." He studied me before sliding my change across the counter. "Sun sets at 7:18. Make sure you're out before then." I laughed lightly. "Don't worry, just doing a quick loop." He didn't smile back. "That place doesn't have loops. Only one way in, only one way out. If you're lucky." Typical small-town dramatics, I thought. By the time I reached the unmarked trailhead, it was 3:42 p.m. The clearing had no signage, just a small gravel turnout. Mine was the only car. I'd have about 3.5 hours of daylight, plenty of time. As I laced my boots, the air pressure changed. Footsteps approached from behind. "You planning to hike Dead Pine?" I turned to find a park ranger. At least he wore the uniform of one. But everything else about him seemed wrong. His skin had a grayish cast, stretched too tight over sharp cheekbones. His name tag was scratched beyond recognition, and his eyes never seemed to blink. "Yes," I said, fighting the urge to leave. "Just a short hike before sundown." "When was the last time it rained here?" he asked abruptly. "I don't know. I'm not from around here." 53 days, he said. "No rain. Yet the moss grows. It all grows." He tilted his head slightly. "You need to leave before dark." "I know. No," he cut me off. "I'm not warning you about getting lost or wildlife. I'm telling you because it gets inside the trees after sunset." My mouth went dry. "What does?" His face twitched. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Just a soft, barely audible hum. Then he blinked rapidly, like someone waking from a trance. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered. "No one should be here." Before I could respond, he turned and walked stiffly toward a small ranger station nestled between the trees. The rational part of my brain said this was just an eccentric local trying to scare me, but something deeper was screaming at me to leave. I ignored it. I'd driven 6 hours. I needed this hike. Dead Pine Trail transformed immediately. The temperature dropped several degrees. The ambient sounds of wind and birds simply stopped. The air felt heavier, almost syrupy. The trees were unlike any I'd seen before. Tall, unnaturally straight pines with bark so dark it appeared almost black. No branches until 20 feet up, creating the impression of countless silent sentinels. The forest floor was carpeted with thick moss that absorbed all sound. 20 minutes in, I noticed the first oddity. The moss grew in patterns, perfect circles and spiraling shapes that looked deliberate. I knelt to examine a particularly complex pattern of concentric rings. As I watched, the moss shifted slightly, realigning when I blinked. I stood quickly and continued walking. The deeper I went, the more the forest felt conscious, aware of my presence. The spaces between trees seemed to contract behind me and expand ahead, as if the path itself was breathing. At 4:37 p.m., I reached a small clearing and found the stone circle. 7 megalithic stones arranged in a perfect ring, each about 4 feet tall with a flat, polished face. The symbols etched into them were angular patterns that seemed to shift when viewed peripherally, deep grooves that appeared burned rather than chiseled. I approached cautiously. That's when I first heard it clearly. A low, consistent humming that seemed to emanate not from any single point, but from everywhere. From the trees. I pressed my palm against the nearest pine. The bark was warm, pulsing. I jerked my hand away and checked my watch. 5:15 p.m. The light was changing, afternoon giving way to a strange twilight that made no sense given the time. I needed to head back. Now, I turned around and froze. The trail was gone. Where I'd come from was now an unbroken wall of black pines, growing so close together that not even a child could slip between them. Every direction looked identical. My GPS watch displayed only errors. My phone showed no signal, and a clock that read 7:06 p.m. Impossible given that it had been 5:15 just moments ago. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded wrong, flat and muffled. "Is anyone there? Ranger?" The humming intensified, vibrating in my chest like a second heartbeat. And underneath it now was a pattern, a melody that almost resembled human speech. I picked a direction and started walking. Branches clawed at my jacket. Roots seemed to rise from the moss to trip me. The light continued to fade at an unnatural rate. That's when I first saw it. Trees ahead, something moved. Tall, too tall to be human, and impossibly thin. A vertical shadow darker than the spaces between trees. It had no features I could discern at that distance. But I knew it was watching me. I turned and ran. The humming followed, growing in intensity. I ran until my lungs burned, crashing through underbrush. The forest twisted around me, the same trees appearing again and again from impossible angles. When I finally stopped, I found myself back at the stone circle. The humming was coming from the center stone now. I approached cautiously, drawn by a compulsion I couldn't name. The symbols had changed. Now they formed a pattern I could almost recognize. Almost read. A twig snapped behind me. I whirled around and saw it. A tall, thin silhouette partially merged with a pine tree, not hiding behind it, inside it. The bark had split open like a cocoon, and something was emerging. It had the rough shape of a human, but stretched and distorted. Its skin had the texture of raw wood pulp. It had no face, just smooth, pale bark with vertical splits where eyes should be. And its mouth was a jagged horizontal tear that spread nearly ear to ear. From this opening came not humming, but words. Distorted, multi-layered words in a voice that sounded unnervingly like my own. Just trees, wind, dirt, and me. Perfect. My own words, twisted and echoed. It had been listening, copying. It took a step forward, bark cracking around its limbs. The mouth widened. I ran. Trees whipped past, branches slashing at my face. I could hear it behind me, the sound of splintering wood, the forest tearing open to let it pass. Somehow, I broke through to the parking area. My car sat where I'd left it. The ranger station stood dark and silent. I fumbled with my keys, hands shaking violently. As I unlocked the door, I looked back at the tree line. They were there. Not one, but several dark figures half emerged from the black pines, bark split around their forms. Watching. Waiting. I started the car and floored it, gravel spraying. I didn't stop driving until I reached the main highway. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I checked into the first motel I found, locked the door, and collapsed. 3 days later, I finally made it home. I'd been running a fever, and the motel manager had called an ambulance when I failed to check out. At the hospital, doctors diagnosed severe dehydration, exposure, and early-stage sepsis from multiple infected cuts on my arms and face. "You're lucky," the doctor told me. "Another day, and you might not have made it." I tried to tell them about Dead Pine Trail, about the trees that moved and spoke. They nodded politely and adjusted my IV. After my release, I searched online for any information about the trail. The forum thread where I'd first found it was gone. Maps showed nothing but uninterrupted forest in that area. The few hiking databases I'd checked had no record of a dead pine trail. I contacted the ranger service for that region. They had no record of a station near where I'd been. The last ranger outpost in that area had been abandoned in the 1970s after budget cuts. I still have nightmares. In them, I'm back in that forest, surrounded by trees that hum with my voice. Sometimes I wake up to find moss growing in my houseplants, perfect circles, spiraling patterns. Last week I saw a news article about 3 hikers who went missing in the northern wilderness. Their last known location was near where I believe Dead Pine Trail begins. I've tried to warn people. I've posted on forums, called parks departments. No one takes me seriously. Yesterday, I received an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single Polaroid photo of the stone circle, taken from the exact spot where I had stood. In the background, barely visible between the trees, was a tall, thin silhouette. On the back, written in jagged letters, "We learned your name." That night, as the wind rattled the windows of my apartment, I heard it again, a low, pulsing hum threading through the darkness. At first I thought it was only in my mind, but then the melody twisted, and out of the shadows I heard my own voice, fragmented and echoing, repeating words I'd spoken in the forest. I don't hike alone anymore. I don't hike at all, because now I know. Once the forest hears you, it never lets you go.